Hello, WTF SLO Conference 2022. My name is Andy Grabner, and I'm glad that you are taking 15 minutes out of your time to listen to what I have to say about tips of running successful SLO workshops in under 1 hour. You can see the QR code if you want to follow up with me. This brings you to my LinkedIn profile, and I think you can see all of the rest of the information there. I'm also very proud of being a contributor to the CNCF project Captain. So just in case you're interested in that as well, check me out. But tips of running a successful SLO workshop in under 1 hour. This was inspired by some of the work I've recently done. But let me get started. I want to get started with, while we are here at an SLO conference, and it's not the first SLO conference of its kind. We've been doing this for years. Still, it seems that SREs are challenged, as you can see with defining SLOs. SLOs is the core principle, one of the core principles of site reliability engineering. Based on the latest SRE report that just recently came out, 99% of SREs say they encounter challenges when defining and creating SLOs. And for me, this is almost like a little offense, personal offense, because I've been trying to teach and share my best practices with the SRE community, but I guess so far we have not done a good job. What did they say in more particular? Too many data sources. It's difficult to get the data in one place. Too many metrics, right? It's difficult to find the most relevant ones for a particular service. People are overwhelmed with too much data. Monitoring tools don't allow to easily define and track SLO performance history. Don't know what makes a good SLO. I think that's a big one, right? If you don't know what a good SLO means, then how would you even come up with one? Don't know how to evaluate SLOs, don't know how what metrics to track, and also don't know how or where to get started. So these are some of the things that I thought are really interesting. Now, how can we change this? I have 3 tips for you, and in the end, coming to a conclusion on what helped me recently running efficient SLO workshops in under 1 hour with organizations. The first tip, keep those questions in mind that were just brought up. So first of all, you always have to ask and answer the question, how are certain SLOs relevant for your users of your system? And also for me, and me being, I might be a developer, I might be an operations folk, I might be an SRE, I might be a DevOps, whoever I am. You need to answer this question. The second thing is, how do you actually define those SLIs behind the scenes? How do you define availability? What is an error? You have to be very specific here, because everybody otherwise has a different opinion on it, and then you'll potentially run into issues because people talk about 2 different things even though they're labeled the same thing. Who is responsible for an SLO? Very important. If you don't have any ownership, nobody really cares about or sees that they have to take action. How do you measure SLOs? Right? We have a lot of monitoring tools out there, observability platforms that give us a lot of metrics, but how do we specifically measure this one? How do we get the data? And then the last one here is, what is a realistic objective? Right? SLOs are always driven by, you want to reach a certain goal. You want to have a certain availability, a certain error rate, but you need to come up with realistic objectives. So keep those 5 questions in mind, because they will help you guide your conversations. The next thing, big tip here, start with, and I call them consumer-focused SLOs here, so not customer end user focused, because for me, your customer might be somebody that sits in a browser that might and uses your software or uses your mobile app. It could be somebody that sits in a car and interacts with your applications that you built for that automobile manufacturer. But it could also be some service that just consumes an API. So in the end, it's who is consuming your services. And I really thought this blog from Zendesk really interesting, because they also said it doesn't help you if you create dashboards with hundreds of SLOs, and if they're all green, you think everything is good, but if the customer experience an error, then obviously you did something wrong. You didn't focus on the right things. And therefore, a tip is really start with consumer-focused SLOs. So SLOs that are measuring the consumer experience. Now, here's the big one. Run a top-down SLO workshop. And this is really something that I learned. There was an aha moment I had last year when I ran one of these workshops, when I realized I have to go into an organization that came to me with these questions like, they don't know what good SLOs look like. They don't have any ownership. And so the first thing before I started the workshop is I brought the business owners of the application in a room. It was a virtual room, obviously, because of COVID, but I brought the business, the marketing, the DevOps teams, the SRE teams, and also development leads into a room. And then we started identifying a top-level relevant consumer-facing objective. And in their case, this was a bank. They had a new banking app, a new mobile banking app. And I asked them from a business perspective, what is your objective with this app? And they told me, well, our objective by the end of the year is that we have more than 65% of our users adopting the new app. So we said app adoption is a key goal for you. But we also were then very specific on how to measure it and what really app adoption mean. And here you can see ratio of new app daily users versus total users. So total users across all the new one, all the new app, and then basically the ratio between how many of the total users are using the new app. 65% is where they wanted to get. That's a good objective to have. The next thing I asked, so what do you think is keeping you from reaching this goal faster? And then they said, well, right now we have terrible app ratings on the Android and iOS store. We have about a 2-star rating. And I said, well, what's your goal? Well, they said, we want to get to at least a 4-star rating or maybe 4+. So we said if 5 stars are total, which would be 100%, 4+ stars would be about 85%. So we set a goal on where they need to go and had already the first kind of SLO that relates and supports the top level SLO, the app adoption. And the next thing I asked them, so why is app rating that bad? And then they said, well, if we look at the comments, people are complaining about crashes. The mobile app keeps crashing all the time. And so we said, well, how do we measure crash rate? Because it has to be something that we know what crashes really mean. So we settled down on crash rate on officially supported devices, because obviously it's going to be a tough goal to reach if you just say any type of crash, if you have users that are using the mobile app on devices that you cannot test or cannot support for whatever technological reason. And so we said, we want to get this down to slower than 2% of apps. I think it can get even better, but I think in this case, this was a great first kind of breaking down the top level consumer-centric SLO and down to something that is obviously important and impactful by business. So now you can see here, we also assigned ownership. We said app adoption and app rating. This is something that the business owns, because business can also run marketing campaigns. So they have a better handle and a better leverage on kind of, getting the word out, obviously, as compared to a developer. As a developer, app adoption is only, I can influence it somehow, but only in certain aspects. And this is why we then also said, right, the ownership here, kind of the layover between the business objective and more the technical DevOps metrics is app rating and mobile crashes. So the DevOps teams can make sure, for instance, that the quality is correct. The DevOps teams can help in their pipelines to build in automated testing of all of these supported devices. They can also get in, data, obviously, from the production monitoring to see which devices are currently used. Maybe some of them are officially supported, but not properly tested. So the DevOps teams can work with the development teams to make sure they're focusing on quality. And then very importantly, you need to pull in these metrics somehow. So for instance, the one that I'm showing here is we were pulling in the ratings from the Android and iOS store through the public APIs, and then we can put it on the dashboard. And then the business owners could, for instance, see, are we moving towards the right trajectory, right? Is the rating actually going up over time? Now, I always say behind every mobile app, there's a strong backend, obviously. And so what we also then did is we broke it further down. And what we said is when you're logging in, when you're opening up the mobile app, the first thing is you log in, you authenticate. So we also specified SLOs for the backend services. And we started with the authentication service. So we said availability of that service clearly has to be very high, 99.99. System has to be available. And here, it was the way we specified is the rate of requests with a valid response. Now, there's different ways how you can specify, obviously, availability, but this is how what we settled down. The next thing we said is response time. We also set a response time goal In this case, you can see the rate of login requests have to be faster than 500 milliseconds. And here we said it should be above 85%. That means in 85% of the cases when the login request comes in from a mobile app, then it should respond within 500 milliseconds. The last thing we said, error rate. Obviously, we talk about error and people complaining about crashes and things not working. Here we also said from a technical side, under high load, we need to make sure that it's not only fast, but also that requests are not failing with an HTTP 500 if valid input comes in. This was just not long enough in the text to put it in. You have to be very specific. First of all, we specified the HTTP status code, and also how do we measure it? We said focusing on all the requests that are faster and that are getting correct input data, and this is why they should also respond in a proper way. So we can obviously measure this, we can put it on the dashboard, and we can give this data to the right people. For instance, SREs and DevOps. SREs can obviously make sure that the ops, that the system is scaling, that the right resources are there to ensure availability, to ensure response time. DevOps obviously can then again focus on quality, making sure things are covered, all certain use cases are covered that could potentially lead to failing requests to HTTP 500s and so on. Can invest in automated performance testing to ensure performance. So I think the key thing here is what you see is we broke it down from the top to bottom, but we also specified an owner. We aligned it with the top. We clearly defined and make it measurable. We set realistic goals that were agreed on by everyone, and we made it visible and tangible. This for me worked pretty well. And it helped me in my workshop so far, starting from the top, breaking it down, but bringing everybody in the room so we can all agree on a set of first metrics. So this was tip number 3, which means, to summarize, what makes good SLOs? Again, just repeating, but I think it's so important. You have to be clearly defined what the SLO really is. So for instance, how do you define a failed request? How do you define availability? It has to be measurable. How do I get this metric? Do we have monitoring in place? Do we need to put something in? Do we need some synthetic tests? How do we get this data? How do we get availability? Realistic and achievable objective. So here the thing is, again, do we have any historical data that we can make our objective based upon? Or do we have competitive information about what our competition is doing? Or do we have any legal objective, right? Maybe you have some contracts with third-party users. Then define the owner. Who is the owner? Who drives it? Business, DevOps, SRE, developers, third-party provider. And then make always sure that you align your SLOs that you're responsible for with the top-level goals of the company or the top-level goals of this particular application. Like in my case that I showed in the workshop, I've tried to align it always with the mobile adoption. This was a big goal. I also like here to say that in my work that I did recently around OKRs, objective key results, I think it's pretty much the same thing what we do here with SLOs. If you've ever heard about OKRs, objective key results, you typically define top-level goals, and then you're trying to break it down into things that you are then, as individual teams, can contribute to the overall goal. Could be a revenue goal for the company or a user adoption goal, and then you break it down into individual SLOs so that everybody can contribute and feel kind of responsible for it as well. With this, I want to let you go back to watch the next session. If you have any questions, follow up. I think you will hopefully find me, and hopefully you also take advantage of some of the QR codes I put in there to just get more information of what I've been doing. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.